Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nathan Stelter, president at the Stelter Company. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today, AI and Fundraising. Let's Get Real, presented by, as Jen mentioned, Josh Birkholz, CEO of BWF and current chair of the Giving USA Foundation. I'll get back to introducing Josh just in a quick minute, but first I'd like to say a few words about Stelter's webinar series, which I believe many of you are familiar with. But at Stelter, as an expert advocate for asset-based giving, we've long been committed to providing innovative solutions and education for the nonprofit industry. As the tide rises, so do all boats in the harbor. And we pride ourselves really on being this bridge builder for the community, and are always happy to host these free webinars today, including the one today, to connect you to experts from across the country to assist you in maximizing revenue in your development portfolios. Today's webinar is actually our second of our 2024 webinar series. We have an amazing slate this year of presenters lined up: Juan Ross, the infamous Pamela Jones-Davidson, John Kendrick will host a panel on legacy challenges, as well as Meg Klein from the University of Illinois, just to name a few. We actually had a terrific presentation just recently around last month's Surviving and Thriving the Silver Tsunami, where we shared marketing approaches that helped to triple World Wildlife Fund's plan giving results. And as always, you can review that recording as well as others at stelter.com/webinars. And for all of our upcoming webinars, please keep an eye on your inbox as we'll send out invitations as we get closer to those dates. For today's webinar, again, very excited to introduce you to somebody I've known for a while and actually just saw a couple weeks ago, Josh Birkholz. As I mentioned earlier, Josh is the CEO of BWF, which is, if you're not familiar with them, the nonprofit service and technology company known for its innovation in elevating philanthropy around the world. Josh is one of the brightest minds I've known in philanthropy, specifically data science, and is a leader in big philanthropy and an architect of the business of fundraising. In his 25 plus years in the charitable sector, he's led the establishment of data science and fundraising, developed high ROI. I think one of your first tools, I think it was DonorCast, if I recall correctly, Josh, but developed high ROI operational infrastructure, guided fundraising through challenging economic conditions, and crafted authentic approaches to high net worth giving. He's the author of Fundraising Analytics and Benefactors, and is also a contributor to a kaleidoscope of prospect development and return on character. Josh, as I mentioned, is the current chair of the board of the Giving USA Foundation, where we saw each other at some Giving Institute and USA meetings in Florida just a couple weeks ago. But he's also an instructor at Rice University Center for Philanthropy and Nonprofit Leadership. He earned the Crystal Apple Award for Teaching Excellence from CASE and the APRA Visionary Award for his innovation in applying data science to fundraising. Very excited about the talk today, which is an extended version of the closing keynote he gave at this past fall's National CGP Conference. And Josh, I will hand it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Nathan. It's really a pleasure to see you again. It was good to reconnect. As Nathan said, we've known each other for years, and certainly the admiration is mutual. So thank you for this opportunity to talk with some of your friends, and I'm sure a lot of us know each other on this in this very small fundraising world that we all share. I really enjoyed speaking at the CGP conference, and a lot of people said it was short and would love to have a deeper dive into applications. And I'm really thrilled that Nathan's given this opportunity for me to do so. So I'm hoping this is of some value. I'm not going to just talk the whole time. As Nathan and Jen, who also thank you, Jen, had mentioned, the Q&A is really what a lot of you look forward to. So I want to make sure, even though I'm a bit of a fire hose speaker, maybe that'll be good for some of you. I'm going to challenge Zoom's ability to do the closed captioning. So I apologize to those of you if I strain the accessibility opportunity within that. But I'm going to speak through AI and fundraising, some of the things that you might know, but I really want to truly get real and where are we seeing applications, where are we seeing development, what's being used right now, and where are people exploring to use it, so that we can maybe come away with some ideas. Obviously, from a webinar, you're not going to come away and be able to be an AI expert, but probably the biggest change in AI is how accessible it has actually become in terms of the generative content. So I'm going to just jump right in, and we're going to talk a little bit, and hopefully you get some value. If not, just save it for the comments, because my pride's too fragile. I'm just kidding. I enjoy and welcome all of your feedback. Now, I wanted to start with the GPS, because as you hear throughout, obviously AI is nothing new. We all use AI all the time. Some of us know we are, some of us don't realize it. But the story that I like to tell here is about my daughter. I've got three daughters, all three in college at the moment. And our family was visiting my in-laws, which live about an hour away. Now, my youngest daughter, who drove separately from her college to meet for this family gathering, has a bit of a lead foot. She drives really fast, and it's a little bit scary. And anyways, we were both leaving from my in-laws' house and driving back to our house. And she left about 5 minutes before I did. So I figured she'd be home 15, 20 minutes before I got home. And so I pulled up into a driveway at her house and she wasn't there. So I assumed, oh, she must have stopped to get gas, whatever. She pulled up a few minutes later. And I said, so what happened? You're not here as quickly as I thought you'd be. And she's like, oh, I'm trying to hack the AI on my phone. And I'm like, tell me more. She's like, well, I drive so fast that now I realize that the Maps apps are suggesting a shorter arrival time, and now I'm getting really stressed out. So I'm trying to purposely drive slowly when it's not urgent for me so that it starts to give longer arrival times that I can beat again. And it didn't even occur to me, but yes, even our maps are learning about our driving habits and why it's getting more and more accurate for how long it predicts until we get someplace. Of course, we all want to hack it. We all want to drive our own way. We must know better than the AI, but it's learning about the choices we make. Now, that's just one example of many. Now, this is nothing new, but it became such a big topic really last winter. And that's because of the ChatGPT launch, probably. But anyways, it became a news story. It's similar to how the internet was around for years before the Mosaic browser first came out, the predecessor to Netscape and Chrome and Edge and whatnot. With ChatGPT launching a very publicly accessible AI for generative for the everyday users, suddenly it became a thing. It became a discussion point. And usually the discussion point is between those that love it, the kind of the angel halo that the Economist, I love the Economist cover, or the devil image, kind of the good and the bad. And depending who you're talking to, you're going to see that. So from the good side, oh, this exciting technology that's changing everything, driverless cars, medical marvels, music generators, cybersecurity, virtual partners, et cetera, to AI could wipe out humanity. It's the Skynet, it's Terminator, it's all the things, we're going to fear the extinction of humanity. Now, the reality is it's probably in between, that it is exciting. There's a lot of cool things. And there's also reason for us to have some caution sometimes. I think anyone would be lying if they don't see both sides of it. There's both innovation and there's potentially ways that we need to be above board on the ethical use of AI. Now, it has been around everywhere. Probably the most common things that we see are autocomplete and autocorrect. You start to type in Google and it's going to suggest different things for me than for you if you're starting to type certain phrases because it's learned from us. That's a type of machine learning. Or even the autocorrect will start to learn words that you commonly use in your texts or names, for example. It'll know that this weird spelt name is actually my daughter Karis. As opposed to I'm starting to write the word character or charisma. Many of us, our first exposure to AI was the Watson playing Jeopardy. IBM, of course, was the founder of the Watson platform, which was an early AI, which has evolved quite a bit into the Watson XAI studio now. But it was basically fancy information retrieval, but also the audio recognition and so forth, which if you're using a listening device like an Amazon Echo, a big part of that is learning how you ask questions, learning from your voice. Obviously, there's the creepy side of it, the things that we hear it say, or we're just talking about a side conversation, something we get some ad for something. Certainly, there's that always listening that gives us pause a little bit. But sometimes we like those recommendations, like when we're on Amazon and say, hey, you might like this book, or you might like that book, or based on your shopping habits, you definitely need another bass guitar. Don't listen to your wife who says you have too many. Maybe that's just one of us and applying to the speaker. But there are AI uses everywhere around, certainly, that we know about. But there's also a lot of challenges in what we've been seeing so far in AI. If any of you took the MIT extension course, a lot of people took that. It was a really wonderful course on AI at MIT. You'll be familiar with the image on the left. It was pointing out how the image recognition, pattern recognition software could not tell the difference between a muffin and a chihuahua. So it had this list and the computer couldn't tell the difference. Humans could find it really quickly. You could see which ones were the chihuahuas and which ones were the muffins. But that's a good example of the humans' pattern recognition is still so strong. We're a ways from that with computers. Also, although this is getting a lot better, scaling issues, be literal. I'd like to have a picture of me in this mountainscape, and it literally has the sizing wrong. And we've all seen those jokes, and we've seen things like that, and it's fun. But sometimes I just one of our nonprofit clients used a cover, and AI is notoriously for getting bad at getting hands. And their cover art was an AI generated image, and so many people wrote in to complain about the terrible hands. It's so obvious you're using AI. Can't you highlight local artists? And it's a part of the discussion that we didn't think we'd have a year or two ago. But it's also a discussion that's happened many, many times in the past. Obviously, the internet, it's just like the AI strike in some ways. When it was first, I mean, we don't even think about the internet anymore. How rare, I mean, except when our Wi-Fi goes out, we'll say, I don't have internet. But it's just kind of every day now, like when we're ordering on Amazon, when we're using a QR code at a restaurant to look up a menu, when we're texting, when I'm FaceTiming with my daughter overseas, et cetera, et cetera. And when it was coming out, I was like, nah, this isn't a thing. It's not going to be nirvana, as this old article was. The protests against AI, some of it is really legitimate, especially when it comes to artistic expression, and we need to have those debates. But also we remember the math teachers protesting against calculator use. And within 10 years from this, they allowed calculators to be used while people took their SATs and ACTs. Like, that's how quickly it went. I remember chatting with another tech leader in the industry who had mentioned, like, 10 years from now, people are going to probably have a ChatGPT type of device while they're taking their tests. What we have now is the calculator for language. That was a fascinating perspective. Whether or not it'll be to that extent, we do know it'll be more commonplace and not be thought of as a thing. It's probably more going to be like the internet. It's just how we're using AI and in what context, and where we all land on that. Now, from the analysis done by the big consulting firms and so forth, I think they're pretty spot on. I mean, where we're seeing in terms of predicted impact on GDP is probably operational efficiency more so than anything else. Being able to do more with each staff member, which actually is a real positive thing in the fundraising profession that has been historically and continually understaffed. Can we do more with the staff that we have? Be more productive with our staff, obviously extending the reach of personal connection. Now, for a smaller organization, this can be really important, as the larger organizations oftentimes have the resources for more mass personalization, that each person can have personalized experience within the institution. We may or may not be doing that, but if you're one person, you're always making choices on what do I do. Is it better to have something that maybe might be less genuine, like that AI image that had the hands wrong, but I'm able to, through technology, provide a personal reach to more individuals, versus having something that's very generic? Those are some of the questions from the small place all the way to the very large place. How do we stay genuine and stay authentic, but also use it to bring efficiency, do things better and faster than before? A lot of people are like, AI, we can do things faster, but a lot of people aren't quite sold on, can we do things better? Not quite yet. Now, there's certain areas where I think that there is some thoughts that we could do things better. And so what is it? First of all, I'm going to go back to the fundamentals before we get into these applications. AI on its surface is just using computers to solve problems and make decisions in ways similar to human intelligence. This is, if you Google, the most common definition you'll come across. And there's kind of a lot to that, to using computers to solve problems and make decisions. We already use computers to solve problems, but make decisions, that's a little bit different. Now, when we think about what are those areas, there's really two categories that are most often talked about. Predictive and generative. Predictive is kind of an umbrella term, sometimes broken out with predictive and prescriptive. Now, predictive analytics and data science has been around for some time. So if you think of a predictive model, or maybe the credit score, which shows what your score is in terms of your likelihood to pay back a loan, or more accurately, make money for the lender, your credit score is an automated static model. It's got some fixed weightings, but as you do different behaviors, like you have really good loan repayment behavior, or maybe you don't pay off your credit card, your score is going to go up or go down. It's making adjustments. But when we think of identifying prospects, making forecasts around a campaign, doing simulations around staffing numbers, if-then type of things, those are all in the predictive AI camp. And there's been a lot of progress in machine learning, making some of the decisions and automatically adjusting itself as we go into predictive and prescriptive applications. What most of the news articles cover, on the other hand, though, is generative AI, which is within the ChatGPT, where you're asking it questions, it creates new content. It might create new images, music, text, even write out code for computer code for you to save time in programming. I mentioned I have 3 college-age daughters, and I've certainly asked them, like, so do you guys use AI for your assignments? Like, oh no, we'll get busted on that. They can determine that. However, my one daughter said, I definitely use it for reading assignments. Like the teacher said, or the professor would be like, read pages 20 to 87 of this textbook. I'll go into ChatGPT and say, summarize page 20 to 87 from this textbook with the key points that I should know. And it does that very well. So she'll do things like that. I'm like, oh, that's fascinating. Is it the grunt work? Is she sacrificing learning by not reading all the details? Possibly. That's the discussions a lot of us are having. But generative AI is probably more often what you're seeing in terms of news articles. But I don't want you to forget, as predictive AI is probably making some of the bigger impact initially in the fundraising space. And I want to give the progression because applying data to fundraising is nothing new. It's certainly been a big part of my career. Nathan was correct. It was the DonorCast line I launched back in 2006. If we go all the way back, it's hard to say specifically, but a lot of people point out prospect research as one of the first assigned data for strategy type of functions in fundraising. In the 70s, we started to see distributed development functions, meaning rather than just hiring fundraisers, we have different people to manage the data, to track the gifts. There's different functions that were distributed based on roles and responsibilities and so forth. And we saw some of the early advent of prospect research really emerge in the 80s. This was the first book. It was very small on the screen, probably. Bobby Strand was the editor of that. A lot of people credit Bobby Strand as being kind of the pioneer of prospect research, certainly Ann Castle at Harvard and others. There were a lot of early voices that defined it. And in those early days, it was very much a risk management applied data tool. If we ask for the wrong thing at the wrong time, at the wrong amount, we risk not having a successful solicitation. And a lot of it was very qualitative, high-touch, relationship based. What happened in the 90s is as we moved to relational database structures for the first time for many of us, we started to see demographic modeling and screening, and all those things emerged partly because the other thing that happened along with relational databases is we started to see more emergent comprehensive campaigns. As opposed to campaigns just for a building project, we started to see comprehensive organization-wide campaigns. What happened there is we saw an increased need for prospect identification and needing more data tool sets. That's why we saw kind of the necessities, the mother of invention. The market was anxious for screening tools, which were single asset, later one-stop shopping, demographic modeling, trying to take the whole database and say who might be a prospect. Now that led in the 2000s to us doing predictive modeling. Here's a person more likely to do this thing than this other person. We'd see more capacity analysis around campaigns and starting to apply data in that time period. But in 2010s, we started to see that the collective consciousness around using data changed. And I'd say the biggest driver of this has been the movement around behavioral economics. Obviously, Thaler, who won the Nobel Prize in economics for his pioneering work in behavioral economics, but certainly even like journalists and I'd say pop economists, you think your Malcolm Gladwell's or Stephen Levitt or Dan Ariely's and so forth, that started to cause in business us asking questions like, what's actually happening? Like, are the old wives' tales or the back of the envelope or whatever the old cliches were, is that really how we should be running our businesses? Or should we be looking at what's actually happening? It started to change, and that provided a framework where we could move into adopting some of these early AI practices. So where we're currently seeing fundraising applications, and I'm going to dive into a few of these, are around generating content, certainly on around marketing materials, even some documents and so forth. Prospect ideas where we're seeing probably the most investment in the industry. Obviously, some business simulations, more obviously used by consulting firms, I should say. Action recommendations, we're seeing that around cultivation. I like to call those nudge and prompt software. We have a few of those out there. Our marketing automation around our mass marketing, how constituents are perceiving us, imputation around sentiment analysis. That's certainly something we've played around with a lot. Donor journey mapping, and even what's the next thing I should do? Task wizards, sort of along with that nudge and prompt kind of concept. So I'm going to dig in though, because on the predictive side, a story I like to bring back to is from my early days. I was doing data science probably since about the late 90s. And it really started to bubble up around, I don't know, 2002-ish, 3-ish. We're seeing it in a lot of sectors. A lot of people know Oakland A's and Moneyball was that, but every sector we had our moments. And we were going through this. I was working with some folks from Fair Isaac trying to learn about credit scoring and how I could apply that to the University of Minnesota where I was at the time. And I remember having a conversation with Fair Isaac about a week before I had a conversation with MIT, and it was almost the exact same conversation. I'm like, oh, this world is changing. And it was really simple because what Fair Isaac said is when we developed the credit score, so the FICO scores, Fair Isaac is the FI of FICO. When we developed the credit score, we were looking purely from an operational efficiency lens. Our underwriters are spending a lot of time researching if we should give someone a loan. And for each, I don't know, 7 or 8 names that they research, one of them gets a loan. All that other time was basically lost because we're not making money off of that loan. So we started to study who do they always say no about, and can we cut some of those out without going through underwriting? And so they developed this score basically to reduce that load. And after they developed it, on average, their underwriters were researching 3 names for every loan that they produce. So without adding a single underwriter, there was twice the volume, more than twice the volume of work coming out of that underwriting team. Now, I was chatting at the time, it was Rob Scott at MIT was talking about their campaign. We've got this big campaign in front of us, how many prospects we need. And I've been studying our prospect researchers, and they look at about 7 or 8 names for every name that they give to our major gift officers. And I looked at how many researchers we have, how long that takes per name, and I realized we're not going to have enough prospects until about a year or 2 after this campaign is done. So that's not going to work. He's like, do you know of any technologies to get this down to 3 to 1? I'm like, well, as a matter of fact, a lot of the early predictive analytics was actually an efficiency model for the prospect development function. It was like modeling, or like wealth screening and modeling. It reduces the pool before we do it the next step on the process. And I've talked about that pipeline a little bit more. Now, this gave way, we started to see much more automated modeling in the 2010s. This was my good friend, Amy Lampe. She's my co-author of the book, Benefactors. We did a project together when she was running the Alley Theater's development operations. And what we did is we found as people went to the shows or certain things changed, that their affinities were dynamic. Like we certainly know that. I mean, propensity is not static. After I go to a show at the theater, like at the Alley Theater, and if it was a good show, I might like the theater a lot better those few days afterwards than I did 3 months before because of my experience. We certainly see that in patients, grateful patients' ideas. The gratefulness is immediately after an experience. There's a higher propensity and it's dynamic. So we tried to capture this dynamic affinity, and it would send alerts that this person might be more likely to give now than they were before, and it would kind of send alerts. And they had their a big growth year in the year everyone else's numbers were going down. It was around Hurricane Harvey, if you recall those times. And everyone's like, what's the alley doing that's climbing? And it was that they aligned the behaviors according to the dynamic nature of affinity. Now, that wasn't machine learning yet because we decided the constraints and the data that informed what their affinity was, what was changing. Now, what's changed in recent years is where the formula and the data are changing. Not just the data changes, but the formula. And this is where a lot of people start to get confused. But let's say I've got a population doing something I like and everyone else. I want to find more people that are like the ones doing something I like. I mean, even in the words, it's already wrought with biases. So we have to control for some of those unintended biases. There's no question about it. But in terms of these two populations, there's usually different, you might use regression, there might be decision trees, there's more complicated neural networks and so forth. And here's all my inputs and here's my outputs, meaning here's all the data that I have to measure and here's what I'm trying to predict. And in a predictive model, you say, all right, here's what I'm trying to predict. Here's all the data. What makes this group different than the random population? And then we score the random population by how much they look like this other group. Now, with dynamic is we've created that formula and then data's changing in the system. With AI, what we're able to do now is saying, all right, here's my target population. Here's all the data. Right now, maybe regression's working the best. But next week, you know what? An SVM or a neural network working better. And with these different data points, it will automatically change itself and say, now here's another way to predict this population, where you're still providing some direction. Here's what I want you to predict. Here's the data you have available to you. Then it lets the machine, quote unquote, learn and adapt to that population. Now, some people, when they say AI, they're also just generically including dynamic automation. It's fine. I don't really care that much about words. Some people get really mad about it. There's actual AI where the machine's learning. Sometimes automation is casually called AI. Whether it is or isn't, I honestly don't care, but I support you all if you want to fight over the language. But technically, AI is the machine learning and not just automation of static formulas. Now, what we've seen is we take these different things. So like that example with the Alley Theater, if you can apply that in terms of that was sending alerts, but within the portfolio level, we're seeing several software platforms coming out that say, hey, you might want to talk to this person. Here, let me start the email for you. And we're seeing some ways of trying to interface within the actual activity. That's what an area where we've seen, I think there's 3 companies that jump to mind already that are doing that type of work. Now, I mentioned I would talk about that in the context of the whole pipeline, and I think this is an important consideration. So this chart, I know it's messy, it's big. If you're on a small laptop, I apologize. If you're in a big room and you're sliding up closer, the words don't matter as much, but I want to talk through this concept because I think it's really important. From a consulting perspective, when we're evaluating the efficacy of the operational structure, one of the go-tos is to look at the whole pipeline management. So much of the departments within fundraising intersect with the pipeline. And so I want to just use one view, which is sort of a waterfall view from a pipeline. And so on this chart, it's not to scale or anything, but imagine this tall upper left end. If we screened and had all the data on everyone on the database, this is how much. This is 100% of the value of our constituency. That can be many billions of dollars, might even be $1 trillion at a few very elite institutions and so forth. But we add all their capacity together, that's how much everyone is worth. Now, if we go down to the bottom right, the other extreme, this is how much money we raise. Let's say it's over 1 year, a 5-year period. The number doesn't matter because the scale doesn't matter. But whatever we set, we'd use that throughout this analysis. This is our yield rate against the overall file capacity. Now, if that's, say, 5% of the wealth is what we raise in 5 years, the question is, what happened to the other 95%? It's not good or bad, but can we classify the other 95% of the wealth that we didn't raise? So we start from the beginning, and obviously, when we start out, we're probably doing screening. We might do modeling. There might be something, here's like a plan gift model to predict bequest people, or maybe life income modeling, whatever the type of modeling is. That produces sort of like here's some possible matches. I like to call it like eharmony.com. Here's your possible matches. You're probably not going to go on dates with them all, but you might read their profiles. Oftentimes the prospect research, so let's say those that come through screening, you've already cut out the majority. Then the research team comes in and they'll probably verify with data to try to predict or to say, yeah, this is a good name, this one isn't. So they're doing it qualitative one-on-one. Then some get through that, they send them out for assignment. Some names end up in portfolios, others don't. Some skills fight over, oh no, that's my prospect, not your prospect. That costs us a lot of money often. And so the assignment protocol. Then the names go out for discovery. And the discovery calls, it's different institution. Let's say it's a 20% attainment rate, which for every 5 people we try, 1 takes a visit. So there's 80% off of what was left from here, down to that 20%. Then we decide, no, it's not a good prospect. I'm cutting them. They're out. I keep the name. I'm like, all right, research says it's $1 million prospect. I think it's more of a $100,000 prospect. I've cut 90% of the potential out for that person. Then I get to the ask, I end up asking maybe for 50, and then they give 25. Now, all of these areas are evaluative on how to increase yield rate. If we increase discovery attainment by 15%, that might increase our 5-year yield rate by 1 to 2%, ways that we can get more out of our system. What I'm seeing is a lot of the predictive AI, even some of the generative, are aligning to some of these steps. Learning models around lead gen, most of them pretty generic and just around major giving. I know some of us are working a lot harder around specific outcomes, like ways people give, like a bequest or life income, for example, or to what program. We have an environmental sustainability initiative. Let's find prospects for that, so that the machine learning has a custom targets. Verification algorithms, and our team's built a handful of these to try to model how the researchers verify. We can get about 90% accuracy with mid-level prospects. I say mid-level, up to about $1 million prospects. The very high net worth, it's a little bit trickier to replicate. The nudge software I talked about, generating matching algorithms throughout the cultivation process, and maybe even some AI around generative content around the donor experience. But you're seeing a lot of the AI, and I'm doing it quickly. The point is, a lot of the companies are guessing this is what you want. I want to remind you, and I'm going to say it again at the end, it's more in your control than you realize, because a lot of these companies, they're trying to figure out what the market might buy. So if you want to steer what gets developed, tell the companies, here's what I'd like developed. They probably really value that. So I'm going to give a couple deep dive examples. From that example, I talked about discovery attainment. So it's one of the most common business problems. I'd say at least 3 out of 5 of our clients that we do campaign work with say we have issues with discovery. It comes up almost every time. And the business problem is most identified prospects are unqualified. They take up space in portfolios, and they're distracting us from productive efforts. The follow-up, there's some slack in portfolios. It ends up being poor stewardship of the gift officer time. We're not necessarily seeing the best prospects because it's maybe clogging up the pipeline a little bit. Issues of prospect willingness, as well as officer effect. No one likes to do a cold call, and the officers are the biggest effect on whether discovery works or not, more so than the quality of the prospects. It's usually hacking the officer effect. Now, an ideal outcome is that all the prospects are qualified and disqualified quickly, so that the most likely and able prospects are getting the most attention from gift officers. Now, solutions today, the most common is we try to set expectations. We're trying to, almost like an industrial management. Here's how much time, here's how many attempts, here's how many channels. That's the rules. And it kind of works. I mean, there's some people that certainly respond in that way. Or else we do sunsetting auto removal. So this is sort of like the operant conditioning, negative, negative. If you don't see this name, you're going to lose this name. But if you do see them, you get to keep the name. Sort of like renewing the books, I guess. We might have seen some large-scale warming treatments where marketing is trying to provide some VIP warming to pre-sell the discovery contact. And then there's issues of safety nets. If I don't keep this name in my portfolio, even them getting little attention from me is better than them dropping off to the big abyss, which is the rest of our database. So those are usually the issues. So we come up with safety nets. People are more willing to drop names and clean up their portfolios, whatever. What AI is allowing us to do is a little bit more discovery and cultivation assist software to nudge the interaction and prompt the text. I'm going to come back to that a little bit with kind of the Thaler concept on libertarian paternalism. I have a slide later on that, but it's sort of that nudge concept from the behavioral economics. Secondly, the targeted warming based on machine learning segment and interesting segment. Now, we've tried this at a few institutions. I have a slide from it coming up where here's this segment, and we're going to do some video content and warming from this officer. And this segment has only seen videos from this person. Now, we've tried this with students around the annual fund. Instead of calling, that they would see videos. When they engage with the content, the same kid who's in the video reaches out and like, hey, you're the kid from the video. What they don't know is we had 20 different kids from 20 different videos going to different segments so that they could have that personal attention. The same could be done for gift officers to engage in the digital space in a pre-qualification approach. The AI generated content as well as the imputation for the segment design. and a ready flow of new names auto-signed post-disqualification. If we really have the AI in a dynamic way, when they're disqualified, we can refill almost assembly line like. It sounds transactional, but it's really not, because what all these things are doing is, I always said fundraising is always sitting in someone's living room asking them for money, but AI can tell you which living room. And that's what we're trying to focus on and when to go to their house. Another application that we're seeing a lot of research in, but there's a lot of hesitancy if we're going to actually be able to make progress in this area as an industry, and that's matching of the donor persona to the fundraiser persona. Now, this gets into allocation protocols and also campaign portfolio management. But let's say the business problem is we need to reach all the highly ranked prospects and cultivate them to a bold invitation to participate in campaign. Now, an ideal outcome is the gift officers are engaged, the prospects feel seen, the reach of the team is maximized, and the campaign meets and exceeds its target. Now, the reality is portfolios are often stagnant, they're ponds and not rivers. And our choice of allocation is usually one of two. And it's usually region or it's program. A lot of colleges and universities are based on program. Someone raises money for engineering, someone else for law, someone for business or English or athletics, etc. Some national nonprofits are more likely regional. We have some people in Seattle, some in Los Angeles, some in Chicago, some in New York, etc. Now, both of those are around an operational efficiency. For the programmatic allocation, the operational efficiency is, it doesn't make sense for every officer to learn everything about engineering. Let's have a couple and build a relationship with the dean they can represent, and they can represent engineering well. So it's an efficiency of knowledge. With regional allocation, it's usually a logistical efficiency is where the operation save money. Like, it doesn't make sense to fly two people to Seattle. Let's have one person see both people in Seattle. Now, the question is, if we were to look at fundraiser personas and who they raise money with most effectively, and donor personas, what type of officer do they more likely respond to? Let's use that Seattle example. Who knows what the personas might be, but let's say it's an entrepreneur versus old money. This officer is so good at old money, they are very effective working with the family office, and their likelihood to have a larger, more successful gift with this prospect is much higher. And this other officer is really good with entrepreneurs. They're more like they speak the same language, and they're more likely to be successful. Are we willing to save money, $2,000 in flights, which could be a difference of $5 to $10 million in production? Those are the questions that we're not asking, because we're thinking about the costs without the benefits often when we do regional or program-based allocation. But with AI, we can be doing to date, it's been qualitative, activity metrics and norms. We motivate each other to perform, extend the reach through adding staff. But we can actually do some predictive analytics aligned to the campaign priorities and donor likelihoods. Here's what we're raising money for. Matching algorithms between here's officers that are good with these types of prospects, who are good with this, who are well aligned to this campaign priority, and the metrics defined by dynamic measurements of success, like calibrated scorecard weighting. We've seen weighted scorecards. We can start to see AI in dynamic ways, what's working, what's not, in an ongoing way, and to do process modeling for optimal staff allocation. Now, I led this off by saying there's a lot of doubts, because I've probably lost half of you just with the language on this. But the idea is, are we making the right choices to optimize for our organization to do what we can with the people? Are we making choices for costs without benefit, or politics as opposed to performance? Those are questions we're all asking, and AI is maybe just shining a different light. It's another voice at the conference table saying, hey, have you considered this? Now, generative AI, we're seeing this more often in engagement. Some of the marketing communications content, the mass personalization integration. I talked about those segments of populations getting different videos. Here is one, George Washington University, where each of these different students, different segments, saw content from each of those. I don't know if you noticed, we were super proud to post about them. They announced that they actually increased their giving by 5% last year from the base and from alumni. A day before Case said the average alumni participation went down 5% in the United States. So the very day before, theirs went up. And it's because they thought about it a little bit differently. And it was a ways that I think this world is changing. And it can be scary, but also can be really fun. Because what we've just been able to do is connect constituents to students in a really meaningful way that's not calling them at dinner, but I'm engaging with the student in a way that I'm engaging with others. The competition is not with other charities, it's for attention. And that attention can be anywhere from Netflix to YouTube to scrolling on TikTok all evening, or if some of you are still playing Candy Crush, my heart is with you, but there's other ways that we spend our time. It's definitely not taking student callers like it used to be. It's not necessarily I'm not saying anything against it, but we've all seen what's happened in the numbers. And with the base of support, we're seeing AI to create more dynamic creative segments, clusters, if you will, beyond the old lie bunts and side bunts, which is fine. It's a way to measure our progress, but really more aligned to their behaviors. How we're integrating with, say, our HubSpot or our marketing cloud or whatever marketing automation tool your team is using, how we determine the source and journey. So like if our major gift prospects or our planned gift prospects had their start in annual giving, they moved into mid in different ways. Are we nurturing a journey that feeds more planned giving, that feeds more life income, feeds more outright major gifts for the campaign? Integrating their personas with microsites online, having dynamic content generation so that even if we have 1 million constituents or I'm one person with 1,000, I can provide personalized content in my small shop or my large one. The sentiment, engagement analysis, and imputation, we're doing that a lot right now because so much of philanthropy has been propensity and capacity, and propensity is usually based by measured activity. My colleague Alex Oftley used to be at Gallup, said actually how people feel is more important than what they say. So someone's self-perception of their engagement is more valuable than their actual observed engagement. And we did some testing on that. He's 100% right. If you perceive yourself to be engaged, that's more likely to predict giving, but not everyone's going to tell you that. So how do we impute survey responses? That's another area AI is being used right now. Many of you see there's companies out there, prominent one, doing due diligence work using AI, very effective. Funds management, also another group. I'm trying not to say the company names. There's some really good around how we spend the money that we've raised, gathering research from a prospect research perspective. We're also in the campaign planning. Like these are the typical things you do before the launch of a campaign. There's readiness, the feasibility study, make the decisions, then develop a campaign plan, and then the launch. And the areas where we're seeing AI, some of it's us, others is capacity analysis, how we're forecasting the campaign, doing the pipeline development, testing the priorities with generative content with different populations, using natural language processing to determine the economic trends. Oh, we're likely to see the energy sector to grow in the next year. This campaign in Texas, we probably want to be in front of this with this segment, et cetera. Constituent survey, the imputation around the feelings of engagement I mentioned. Nudge and reminders around the campaign plan and task as opposed to just watching a big Excel spreadsheet. Case and communication content. We're seeing generative there as well as automated reforecasting the campaign and automated performance analysis. What are the things we should do? We should be focusing more sooner, asking, taking more time, whatever it might be. So that's more on the performance management aspect. And just a few more additional thoughts that I want to mention. I was supposed to be ready for questions right now, and I have like 3 slides, so I'm going to just hammer through. The libertarian paternalism was Richard Thaler's concept. It's not actually meant to be political. It actually has to do more with the nudge theory. And I think it describes a healthy relationship with AI very well. To use basically ideas to find faster, better ways for doing things to get you started or assist you along the way. Now, he describes it as the most effective way is to make what you want the easiest way and by removing obstacles, but still providing the agency of choice. So like a GPS, you still have choice, but it's saying, based on our data, we think this is the best way to get from point A to point B. You still get to make the choice, but it's trying to make it easier for you without taking away choice. And I think that's really key with AI. Let's let it give us ways to do things easier, but knowing that we can still make our choice is, I think, a healthy relationship with AI. From an ethics perspective, this industry has always used data very well ethically in my perception. There's always bad actors, but as a whole, the fundraising profession, they see new technology and say, how can we use that for good? The fundraising AI is the large group across companies that are trying to make sure that as a sector, we're all using AI very ethically. You can dig into that more at fundraising.ai. And also, finally, what I said before around this market is building for the fundraising profession. That is their marketplace. And we're trying to figure out, all of us, from Nathan to me to the tech companies, the CRM companies, screening companies, we're all trying to provide value. And I think if there's concerns around AI, say what it is that you want from AI, or if it's not AI, I want you to realize that the wheel is really yours. Yours, if you're a practitioner, you're in the marketplace, and we're also trying to be really collaborative with each other and self-govern and really step up around the ethics. But the secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. And with that, I'd love to encourage all of you to be part of building the new and using AI in fundraising. I covered a lot of ground. There's a lot of things that are starting to happen, and there's probably a few more things that could happen. But hopefully, this was a good 45-minute overview of the space, and hopefully you remain excited. And if not, I apologize for ruining 45 minutes of your life, but I would love to try to make it up to you with some Q&A.
Thanks so much, Josh. And we actually don't have a lot of questions, but I invite people to go ahead and send them in. We do have a little over 10 minutes. And we just had a shout out. Someone said that they encourage everyone, if they haven't read your book, Benefactors, that you need to read it. So there you go.
You see, that's John. Thank you, John. Really appreciate it. Good to see you.
Yeah. So here's a question from Matt. What specific AI tools do you recommend to work in conjunction with an institution's current donor database to create a systematic approach for identifying major gift officer prospects?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm trying to be a little cautious. Like throughout this presentation, I'm not trying to present any specific companies in any ways, but let me describe the types of companies that are out there to maybe help inform the choices. So a lot of the screening companies have really invested heavily in AI tools, which I think are very effective at lead generation. A very common approach is to make models better. Just think about models. You either need lots of data to study about a person. Think of it like the more pixels I have, the clearer the picture. Or I need more examples of what I'm trying to predict. Like if I'm trying to predict life income giving, and I've only got 10 people that have ever done that, I don't have enough observations. But maybe if I had thousands and thousands or other organizations that also have life income gifts, I can get that population larger. So what we're seeing is what I'd say is co-op, using data from multiple institutions and multiple sources to do general machine learning models around philanthropic outcomes that you can align to different areas. The others are, some are using more specifically around custom targeting. I mentioned that some of the areas that we're working on as well, where there's a specific outcome and you create the machine learning in a bespoke way just for that specific outcome. In terms of the tool sets that those of us at the screening companies and the outside resources are using, most are still using R type coding language, or maybe we've got some Python programmers. We're a big fan of the Watson software because we can embed our code, as well as we can automate our build process through the Watson XAI platform. I'm seeing, I mean, there's even some of the old data science, like your SAS Enterprise Miner. There's some of these areas that are still out there. I'd say the statistics companies, the statistics software is very common to have something like that to expedite some of the data cleansing areas. But I'm going to try to avoid naming out any of the specific vendors by name. Just say that I would explore, are they using your data, your outcomes? Is it more general? How would it apply? What's the regularity of that data? And engage in questions like that.
Great. Nathan, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I think there's a couple that have popped up here as Josh was talking. I think the most basic one from Renee was, what are some first steps we can take? She did say great presentation, loved it as well. But yeah, I think a lot of folks, and Josh, I know prior to our talk today, we've seen from the industry, a lot of folks are just kind of wait and see, kind of to some extent. And so any advice on first steps people can take?
Well, first, just get familiar with it. This might be a dumb answer. If you're not actually just playing around with ChatGPT, just do it for fun. I mean, you don't have to like solve the world yet, but if that just like gets you some comfort on, okay, this is its limitations, this is what it does, this is kind of cool. No, that's way wrong. At least you're coming in with some knowledge on the generative content. So first of all, just familiarize yourself with it. Second is, we don't have to recreate or create the whole wheel or build the whole ship, but let's think of one area. Think of 1 or 2 or 3 business problems that you're having specifically. Let's say I use the example of discovery calls. Would it make sense for us to explore some sort of nudging software or look at how we're doing discovery? Maybe we start there, or we just don't have enough prospects. We start with a lead gen. Those are pretty baked into the industry. I know there's some, that slide I had on some of the due diligence or on the fund management. These are providers that are very focused on specific things. You could just try one thing. The weird thing for me to say is, honestly, almost every provider is using AI in some way. Like Nathan and I were just at this Giving Institute thing, and this is the companies that work in fundraising, whether they're consulting firms, they're screening companies, executive search, all the things. And they're like, who's using AI at your companies right now? And the majority of the room's hands went up. Now, what does using AI mean? That's like, it's almost to the point of using the internet. So like, you're probably, dare I say, already using it in some ways and don't know it yet. I think it's more like, let's make some choices of how do we want to go on our journey with AI. And I think playing with it, meeting others, reading about it's a really good step. Don't be afraid of it. Have healthy fear. That's probably a better word.
No, I think that's a great point. Actually, I think there was a couple, and I want to get Josh's input on a couple of these questions, but there was a couple of Stelter specific ones, one from anonymous attendee on, will Stelter be implementing AI in the future? And again, to your point, how
That's
do
all
you
yours.
define AI? I mean, we have a statement around AI because obviously in the work we do from a marketing standpoint, trust with our donors is critical. And so, we definitely don't want it to, from a marketing standpoint, because the easy thing with ChatGPT, heck, my oldest son used it when creating a cover letter for his first job. So, or his first job interview. You want to be mindful of that. But to the other person, to Laura's question around survey and all the great data and feedback we get from survey, yeah, that's definitely on our product roadmap in regards to how do we use AI to better capture, better to make sense from that donor journey and the information we're gleaning so we can have smart feedback response to donors in a timely manner. So there's definitely some really cool things coming down the pipeline. But part of what I think that discussion down in Florida at our meeting was also, what are the statements from a transparency standpoint we need to have with our donors.
No question. And especially, I mean, I remain concerned about bias, unintended bias in model design. So we've seen that, I mean, from the beginning. Predictive science is very biased. And if you want your donors of your future to be different from the donors of your past, lookalike algorithms are kind of risky way to do that. So how do we sample appropriately on our targets so that we're really predicting a behavior, but also trying to represent new population groups that are underrepresented? There's a lot of risk in a lot of the model design. And I'd say to the credit of our industry, a lot of us are really trying to figure out how to do that, how to fix that. So it's not just replicating donors from the past, but really looking at our donors of the future.
We have a couple questions about Virginia saying they're pushing their team to experiment, but they're a little worried about putting confidential information out there accidentally. And I know Nathan had just mentioned, that Stelter, we have our own AI statement. You can find it on our website. Also, we did blog about it if you want to read about kind of how we think about AI as a company. And we made a task force that really researched AI and the different tools out there. And, we have our own internal company policies on how to approach AI. So I think that is a good recommendation, Virginia.
I would also say that it's a fair risk. I would not be putting confidential information into the open AI and ChatGPT universe. That is very risky, and you shouldn't be doing that. But I also like what Stelter did in putting together its own policy. And I would encourage starting with that, looking at what are your own boundaries as an institution. Start to draft something up knowing that this is going to change, and it'll probably change annually, if not quarterly at first, but getting into the practice of this is what we do and what we don't do. Because there are tool sets, some of them I mentioned around the lead gen and some of the predictive, even the nudge and prompt are on a previous GPT, GPT-3, for example, can be built in a closed system within your database. That might be tough if you're like a one-person shop or just getting started, but there's ways to have similar work that's in a closed system and not be out in the open universe. But yes, be careful about putting anything personal into public spaces. I do not recommend that.
We have a question about considerations are being given to the fact that AI has demonstrated to have some racial biases. What should we do as fundraisers to use AI with that in mind?
Yeah, I mean, that goes to what I just spoke to a few minutes ago. Absolutely. These software, they have to be taught. I mean, it's machine learning, and this is one of the areas. It's very risky because it is basically at its core classification algorithms. So like, let's say with predictive AI, it's easier to understand. Here's people that have given before. Let's say it's an all white population. And it said, let's find more like this to give in the future. It's not going to know, it's like, oh, well, they all happen to be white. And so it might build a model that replicates a racial bias. And that's where we have to be really cautious in terms of our building. And there's different ways to do it. First, being purposeful of the data inflow, what we're gathering, that we're doing base development to build the base of support that represents all groups of today and for the future, not from our past. That we're also in our model design, because I mentioned there's targets and there's inputs that are target designed, whether that's through oversampling or reduction or boosting biases, that we can have that be a representative sample of a more diverse population. There's a lot, that's just on the predictive side. On the generative, I have less control over what OpenAI and ChatGPT is doing to learn. But I think on the predictive side, we can actually have a little bit more impact in our own data policy, our own data design, and in our work with vendors and saying that this is important to us. We need you to deliver on that.
You know, we're getting close on time here, but there's 2 or 3 individuals who have questions just on, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit. I think you shared some examples on how you use AI on low level everyday, tasks and such. I know from my experience, and Josh, love to hear your thoughts too. I know, I've used it in certain areas, with, again, ChatGPT being the most obvious from a generative standpoint, on even just setting agendas for certain meetings or doing recaps and follow-ups from certain things. Some of those tasks that just, following up, recapping a meeting, the old memo style that we do in email typically, using AI to capture some of that. Zoom has an AI feature I know that can capture meeting feedback and try to capsulate that, so you're not spending 30 minutes, following up with people. Those are some simple things I've seen. How about what you've seen?
Oh yeah, and coming up with an outline for presentation. I actually did not for this one. I spoke at a large faith-based gathering about a year ago, and they asked me to say, what are 7 to 8 things that will increase giving to faith-based organizations? So I did all this research, I put this deck together, and I was really proud of it. I put a lot of thought into it. And when I was almost done, I went to ChatGPT. I'm like, here's what it would say. And I'm like, all right, list some ways that you would increase giving to religious types of groups or charities. And it came back with 7 of my 8 main points without me prompting it. I'm like, I should have started there. And then I had an outline to kind of like with that agency of choice. I didn't have to follow that outline, but that's another good example. Thinking about framework, how to think through the agendas, the outlines, just what you're saying, Nathan. But this was so awesome. I know we're at time, and I just want to thank Jen and Nathan so much. And I'll turn it back to you.
Sure. Thank you, Josh. We did have some questions that didn't get answered. So if you would like to speak with Josh about that, he has offered his email address. It's on the screen right now. You can also reach out to Nathan or myself if you have questions about Stelter, or visit us at stelter.com. One question was, will we get the slide deck and the recordings? You will have access to the recording and a PDF of the handouts. I will send an email tomorrow that will give you a link to access that, as well as I'll put the link in there to Stelter's AI statement so you can see what that looks like. So that's it. That's all we have for today. Thanks everyone for joining us, spending your last hour with us. Thank you, Josh. Thanks, Nathan. And we hope to see everyone next month for our next webinar.
Appreciate you all. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Have a
Josh.
great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.